Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have actually thought this through. So we thought that we'd probably start with the as-is, because the Serious Organised Crime Agency will be around for the first 12 months of the life of the Police and Crime Commissioners. And that'll give an opportunity for Keith in his presentation to pick up a little bit on what the significant step changes are that are planned in a new organisation that's got a broader remit and, as you has alluded to, some interesting powers of tasking if needed. So I thought also that I just sort of touched a little bit about on the nature of organised crime. It's entrepreneurial. The individuals involved balance risk against profit. They're agile and they are resilient. They don't need to go through Home Office approval. If they want to change their structure, they can just do it like that. That's very helpful sometimes. They exploit vulnerable and failing states, and they cross international and jurisdictional boundaries. And much of the origin of organised crime as we face it is international. And I was chatting to Anne Barnes earlier, both from Kent, both from that Garden of England. Great productivity in Kent on our fields, but I don't see many cocoa leaf plantations, and I certainly don't see many opium poppy fields. So maybe there is just a little bit of an element of internationalism to organised crime. Whatever, the effects of it are manifested on the streets, and they affect our people and our communities, they affect our businesses, and they affect the economy of our country. We see drug dealing, we see mass marketing scams now propagated by email, we see human trafficking and the impact of human trafficking on individuals, destabilisation of business, and if you get into intellectual property fraud, etc., destabilisation of business brands. And I guess the most common feature we see is the effect of drugs on our streets. You know, when our communities go into the local playing field and you've got your children with you, but you've got to stand over needles and drug paraphernalia, that's the impact of the opium poppy on the streets of our country. And then there's people attached to this as well. So a significant thing, and interesting if you take drugs, in 2009, 2010, 26% of us thought that drugs were a significant problem that we needed to deal with because of the impact on our streets. So that's it. If you want to put a figure to it, a figure we've been bouncing around since 2004 is that the cost to the UK of organised crime is about 20 to 40 billion. When you've got that sort of extreme view on life, you know, we really haven't nailed yet down the problem of what the true cost is, but the true cost manifests itself in many areas. A little bit about the how we now operate. SOCA is a law enforcement agency. It is not a police force, and it's very interesting to have heard the commentary about police and crime commissioners. Not just police, and it's crime. And there are many other law enforcement agencies that have a significant impact on how we protect and guard the public. We've got a really broad waterfront as a law enforcement agency. I've got officers in Kandahar who were probably, in some way, subject to some kind of explosive attack last night. Happens every other day. I've got officers in quiet corners of a building in London who are writing very detailed assessments which affect government policy and how we approach complicated issues in terms of our international law enforcement engagement. And we do a lot in between. We've got about 4,000 officers, just slightly less. We operate from 25 locations around the United Kingdom, and we are a United Kingdom organisation, and that's important to remember in this. We've got offices in 40 countries overseas where our footprint can take us into another 100 odd countries. So we can cover about 140 international locations. We use a mixture of approaches, traditional law enforcement where we carry out criminal justice investigations and we lock people up for significant periods of time, and tackling the negative role models in society is really important. However, we also engage with a range of partners and collaborations, and that's regulatory bodies, it's the third sector, and it is, of course, other law enforcement colleagues. But much of what we've had to do to bring together a response to organised crime over the last 6 years has been based on the coalition of the willing. Sometimes people aren't willing, sometimes some organisations don't have the capability to. But it has been very challenging trying to lead a response, a strategic response against the threat from organised crime, where not all are able or willing to engage in the understanding of the threat and the development of plans to tackle it. And much of our partnership also touches upon overseas. If organised crime is genuinely a global phenomenon, then the response has to be in the international dimension. We've talked about that in terms of guarding our public, that we often see officers die. Every other day in Colombia, a law enforcement officer dies as a result of tackling the narco criminals and the narco terrorists. It is not uncommon for officers in international environments, international partners who we can lever up response from, to be attacked or to die in support of UK-focused investigations. Now, I've been accused by some of being a bit of an internationalist, but when you look at how you tackle organised crime, you have to. And I always go back, although this commentary was more around a regional aspect, but I always go back to the thoughts of a very wise former Chief Constable of mine, David Phillips, who said that in 1940, if the Lancashire Fusiliers thought the best place to protect the UK was on the borders of Cheshire and Lancashire, they would have got it wrong. I'll leave you with that thought. There are, we know, significant numbers of organised criminals, and we need to make sure that we have got a proportionate response which covers all of those. How do we do that? Well, we know who our organised persons of interest are, that we can only carry out a proactive response against so many, so we have to have something which tackles the long tail of criminality and the enablers behind organised criminality. And that's about building in activity around the integrated operating model, which is touched upon in the strategic policing requirement. It's about how we engineer and we lever other resources, and how we explain the problem and how others are prepared to come forward to identify what commitment can they bring to tackling this. But this is something which we all have to engage in together. It's probably wrong of me to give anecdote and war story, because this isn't a sort of a plug for SOCA. But just as we're up in the West Midlands, a case which came to court last year involving 7 individuals who got significant sentences, I think a total of about 125 years, for heroin traffic, which linked Pakistan, Holland, into the UK, was, and the main conspirators being in prison at that time, the need to engage with the Pakistanis, the Dutch National Crime Squad, the Metropolitan Police, Staffordshire Police, West Midlands Police. Tackling this requires us all to work together, and I know that Keith will touch upon some important aspects about how we do that better and how we make the step change for the future. But a little bit more about what we do and what you will, I say, have access to, but what some of your chief constables may have or want access to, and some of the challenges about providing that. We provide a range of specialist and niche services in addition to our core functions. Some of these are somewhat sensitive, and I was very pleased that I managed to get into the Strategic Policing Review something which says those specialist covert technical capabilities and other capabilities which exist must be protected, because if we expose some of the tactics and techniques that we use, we will lose that advantage against organised criminality. And when you read the SPR, please, a personal plea for me, think about that and think about how you're going to deal with your chief constables in the future. But what also do we do? There are some myths, and they are big myths, that we haven't supported territorial policing. SOCA had a very difficult childhood, and I'm the first to admit that. But nonetheless, all of your the relevant heads of crime in the police forces in England and Wales will know what SOCA activity is taking place within your force areas. The chief constables might not all know, but that's an issue about them not necessarily being briefed. But the forces know what we do. We do provide support. 535 instances of support to territorial policing last year. That was 90% of the requests which came upon us. Some of those were very specialist, some of those were specialist firearms support. In 43 occasions, we prevented someone being killed within your force areas. At a cost of 1.5 million per simple murder investigation, there are significant cost savings to that. We provide covert and operational and tactical support around counter-corruption investigations, and we provide a range of assessed intelligence and relevant reports which enable the right judgments to be made around operational priorities. We also provide, and there are statutory and treaty obligations upon us, we also provide bureau functions around United Kingdom Financial Intelligence Unit and suspicious activity reporting. We are the Europol and Interpol Centre for the UK. Now, those are things which your forces won't necessarily have the capability to deliver on individually. Some, through collaborative engagement, are able to do better than others. But it's important to recognise that the national agencies aren't just there at the behest of chief constables who aren't prepared to invest in particular capabilities nor to engage with each other. It is not a long backstop. There will be, I think, into the NCA, about 4,000 staff as well. There are nearly sort of 250,000 around the broader policing community. Add to that UK borders, add to that the investigation elements of HMRC. SOCA is a very small part of the law enforcement community, although very specialist. We are fully integrated into all of the regional tasking arrangements, and as I say, heads of crime and others within particular police force areas will know how we touch on that. What I'm keen to do, and I'm waiting for Home Office clearance on this, and it's interesting because it touches upon some of the questions earlier, is to provide a briefing on organised crime to police and crime commissioners, which will spell out the numbers, the impact, where organised crime groups come from, who are affecting their area, and indeed the type and nature of criminality in which they're engaged. And I hope that more public information and transparency will help you understand what the issues are. And a couple of other points. We will move into transition over the next 12-15 months to the NCA. And so SOCA will be a body in change. That's absolutely right, that we look about how we hit the NCA vesting date at pace, at tempo, with no loss of capability, take into account the new approaches which we will put in place around the NCA. But in the meantime, we will require your support and your engagement, and I will ensure that the information which is needed for you to deliver and to understand the organised crime threat in your areas is provided. So that's where we are, that's my intention, and working with Keith, I've got another role, but I think we now move on to Keith talking about how this fits together in the broader context of the NCA with its additional responsibilities.